From the psalmist. God takes their stand in the divine council. God gives judgment amongst the gods. How long will you judge unjustly? By granting favor to the wicked? Give justice to the lowly and the orphan. Maintain the right of the poor and the destitute. Rescue the lowly and the needy. Deliver them from the power of the wicked. They don't know. They don't understand. They wander around in the dark. All the earth's foundations shake. I hereby declare, you are God's children of the Most High, all of you. But you will die like mortals. You will fall down like any prince. Rise up, God, judge the earth, because you hold all nations in your possession. And from the wisdom of Proverbs, speak out on behalf of the voiceless and for the rights of all who are vulnerable. Speak out in order to judge with righteousness and to defend the needy and the poor. The wisdom of God for the people of God. Thanks to be God.
So it was 12 years ago last month that I first started talking to United Parish in Brookline, and the first person I talked to was Ed D'Angelo, who was the chair of the search committee that brought me here. And as one would, I Googled the search committee, and I found out that Ed was a rock star, and I actually found out the entire committee were rock stars. And I asked one former pastor, I said, is this kind of typical? And he said, yeah, it's a good cross-section of the congregation. As I always say, then I found out later that Ed was married to a rock star named Miriam. The thing is, they embody what I often say about this congregation is they're people with a lot of impressive experience, but people here lead with their hearts and their humanity, for which I am deeply grateful. It makes being a pastor a real joy here. And Ed and Miriam raised their two sons here in this congregation, and Miriam, who calls herself a not really practicing secular Jew, I mainly see her at Christmas Eve when we hug at the back of the nave. And it's always this warm exchange, but I'm also aware, like, she's strong and brave. I know that about Miriam. So I thought, we're doing a series on brave. Who better to ask than a criminal defense attorney, public defender? And she said, I don't really think of myself as brave. And I was like, girl, come on. You are a criminal defense attorney. I think you are some of the bravest people I know. If you read the blog this week, I wrote about the ones I've known personally in my life besides Miriam, who I adore and consider heroes. So Miriam agreed to give a talk. And you can either get to know your parishioners by sitting down and having dinner and say, how come I only see you at Christmas Eve? Or you can ask them to do a summertime talk and do 3 or 4 drafts together. And that's what we did, and Miriam was game and has brought a beautiful reflection today of her work and about bravery. So now she did say she's a little less brave speaking in front of people she knows. So could you just all give her some encouragement as she comes up here, please?
Thank you. It really is an honor to be here, and I really appreciated the opportunity to speak to you today about my passion, which is criminal defense, particularly for the indigent. Over my 35 years as a public defender, I've represented people accused of a myriad of crimes from the least serious to the most serious. Some of them have been vilified, and at times I have been vilified too. But as Kent said, I really don't feel courageous when I step into a courtroom because the role of defending someone feels natural to me. Sure, the first time I had to speak in court just to ask for a new court date, I could barely choke the words out loudly enough to be heard by the judge. But speaking up and fighting back on behalf of others quickly became instinctive. I see my role as standing up for people who often never had anyone stand up for them before, like the teenager who was bounced from one foster home to another and ultimately was selling drugs for his foster parents, or the intellectually disabled woman who was a passenger in a car transporting drugs across country. Much of the time, my commitment to my work came from my outrage at the injustices that I saw. I also was inspired by the words of Brian Stevenson. Many of you may know him as the author of Just Mercy, later made into a movie, but also founder of the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama, and the amazing Legacy Museum in that same city. He says, and these are words that have become sort of a mantra for me and my colleagues, we are all more than the worst thing that we have ever done.
Amen.
To me, that captures the essence of what I do. Much of my work, especially in federal court, where trials are few and often ill-fated, focused on sentencing. I tried to persuade judges to impose less harsh punishment by getting them to see and acknowledge the full humanity of my clients, not just their crimes. We just heard the Proverbs speak to this type of work. Speak out on behalf of the voiceless and for the rights of all who are vulnerable. Speak out in order to judge with righteousness and to defend the needy and the poor. At various times, I have felt compelled to speak out, even when my words won't change the outcome. One particular example comes to mind. A judge had just sentenced my client, a young Latino man, to prison for violating his probation for a nonviolent drug crime. My client's girlfriend, who was in the courtroom, was expecting to give birth to their child in a few weeks. So I asked the judge to allow my client to remain free and to postpone the date for him to begin his sentence for a few weeks. The judge refused. As the U.S. Marshals started to put handcuffs on my client, I could hear his girlfriend sobbing behind me. My face must have conveyed my anger. The judge looked at me and said, well, it's not like this is a tax fraud case. Well, tax fraud cases are typically brought against white, middle-class men, much like the judge, and not people of color represented by public defenders like me. The judge's words infuriated me. To me, they meant that the judge, who was white, was distinguishing my client from people like himself, people the judge identified with. I hesitated for a moment, quickly calculating the costs and benefits of talking back. I figured the judge couldn't do anything more to my client. He'd already sentenced him and refused to allow him to remain free. And frankly, I was nearing my retirement date. And I thought, what's he gonna do, get me fired? Probably not. So I spoke up. Instead of remaining silent and just venting to my colleagues back in the office, I said, how exactly is this different from a tax fraud case? The judge turned several shades of red and started to stammer. Finally, he said, well, tax fraud is a non-violent offense. And I quickly retorted, so is this. At that point, I couldn't stop myself. Court was over. I knew my words would not change the outcome. But I hoped that for a moment at least, they caused the judge to think about his own biases. Psalm 82 asks, how long will you judge unjustly by granting favor to the wicked? Give justice to the lowly and the orphan. Maintain the right of the poor and the destitute. Rescue the lowly and the needy. Deliver them from the power of the wicked. They don't know. They don't understand. They wander around in the dark. Remember, you will die like mortals. You will fall down like any prince. Although I feel fearless in a courtroom, I'm not so brave when I enter a gathering where I don't know anyone. I wouldn't sing karaoke if my life depended on it. But in those situations, I'm putting myself out there. As a lawyer, I'm advocating for others, not myself. Once, my husband Ed and I were at a party, and a guest asked Ed what he did for a living. When Ed said he was a prosecutor, that's another story, the other guest looked horrified. You mean you have to stand up and talk in front of other people, he asked. I never could do that. Ed asked him what he did for a living. He was an airline pilot, recently returned from a tour of duty as a fighter pilot in Kuwait. Now that sounds terrifying. I've tried to think back to a time when I had to push through my fear. I remembered when I left my home in Miami to start college at Northwestern University outside Chicago. Having grown up in New Jersey and Florida, I had never been to the Midwest and didn't know anyone there. I hadn't visited the school before I applied or after I was accepted. My parents didn't accompany me to move-in day. I sat alone on the plane, absolutely terrified. When I arrived, I called my mother in tears. It was dinner time, the dining halls weren't open yet, and I complained that I didn't know anyone and it was to go have dinner with. I don't have anyone to share a pizza with, I tearfully whined into the phone. She replied, so go get a hamburger. Looking back, I'm embarrassed by that conversation because my mother, born a Jew in Germany in 1921, had fled the Nazis twice with her family. After the war, she moved to the United States, where she had no relatives. Although she had an advanced degree in chemical engineering, she started out working as a maid for a friend of a family friend. She soon got a job in her field, got married to my father, and had 2 children. But she had to make fresh starts several times over the course of her life. When she and my father split up, when she started grad school in library science as a middle-aged single woman, and when she had to restart her career after a health crisis. She was fiercely independent. Although I didn't realize it at the time, she showed me by example how to be strong and brave. When I was thinking about this talk, Ed urged me to describe my recent efforts to assist Marcelo Gomes da Silva, a teenager arrested in Milford by ICE while he was on his way to volleyball practice. I got a call on a Sunday morning from a friend asking me to help Marcelo's immigration lawyer file a petition in federal court challenging his arrest and detention. I didn't hesitate. I drove to the ICE headquarters to serve the papers, but when I arrived, the building was locked up tight. No one was in sight. I looked at my watch. It was 2:57. I knew that shift change for law enforcement is usually 3 o'clock. So taking a trick I learned as a newspaper reporter years earlier, I walked around the side to the employee entrance and waited. Somebody came out. I handed the officer the papers and told him that a judge had ordered that Marcelo could not be moved without 48 hours notice. It took 4 days before his immigration lawyer and I managed to get a meeting with our young client. The day after that, an immigration judge ordered him released from custody. Governor Healy invited him, his immigration lawyer, and myself to meet with her at her office. Needless to say, that has never happened to me with any of my criminal cases. They don't generate the kind of community support and public outrage that Marcelo's case did. But there is one common thread in all of them: standing up for an individual's rights and pushing back on government power. I am not an organizer or leader. I fight for my clients one by one. It doesn't matter to me what a person is accused of or even has done. They have children, parents, and siblings who love them and whom they love. They have overcome challenges that others would find overwhelming. Each of them has a story to tell. By portraying their humanity, I try to show the court, the judge, and the world that they truly are more than the worst thing they have ever done. Thank you.